The scene introduces Park Roy, a student who's often seen as troublesome because of his mischievous behavior. He regularly gets into trouble with his teachers, who punish him in somewhat exaggerated ways, like making him stand with a bucket of water on his head. This paints a picture of a boy who's often seen as a troublemaker on the surface, but there's more to him than meets the eye. Despite his naughty behavior, Roy is described as having a good heart, unlike Dunwan, another student who's rich, arrogant, and a bully. Dunwan's background as the son of a powerful and wealthy family, a second-generation tycoon, makes him untouchable at school. His classmates, and even the teachers, are too afraid to confront him because of his family's influence. Roy, however, isn't someone who can stand by and watch others suffer, no matter who's causing the trouble. When Dunwan bullies one of their classmates, Roy feels compelled to act. Even though his friend Sua warns him that standing up to someone with Dunwan's family background could have serious consequences, Roy chooses to follow his sense of justice. He bravely confronts Dunwan, showing he's not intimidated by the bully's status or the fear that holds others back. The confrontation between Roy and Dunwan quickly escalates. Dunwan feels embarrassed and humiliated in front of the other students when Roy lectures him. To save face and prove his dominance, Dunwan challenges Roy to a fight, eager to show that no one, especially not a classmate, can stand up to him. Before the fight begins, a teacher arrives, but even the teacher is too scared to intervene because of Dunwan's powerful family. Instead of restoring order, the teacher turns a blind eye, pretending not to see what's happening. This reinforces the idea that Dunwan is truly above the rules, protected by his family's influence. Roy, however, has had enough. Fueled by anger at the unfairness of the situation and the teacher's inaction, he finally snaps. In a moment of rage, he attacks Dunwan, completely unaware that this impulsive decision will have severe consequences not just for him, but for his entire family. After Roy stood up to Dunwan, trouble quickly followed. Roy's father worked at Dunwan's father's company, and the moment word got out, his father was called in by the manager. At the same time, Roy was being beaten by the vice principal at school. It was a harsh punishment, done in front of Dunwan to make him feel better. The principal even bowed to Dunwan, apologizing for Roy's behavior. Soon after, Dunwan's father arrived at the school, bringing Roy's father with him. He seemed like a reasonable man. Knowing how long Roy's father had worked at his company, Dunwan's father didn't want to expel Roy or have him sent to jail. Roy's father was thankful for that. But then things took a turn. The principal demanded that Roy kneel and apologize to Dunwan. Roy, however, had been taught by his father never to lower his pride, no matter the situation. Refusing to kneel, Roy said, "My father taught me never to bow down. If we are honest and stand tall, we have nothing to worry about," he said. They drank together, not realizing that worse was coming. The next day, Roy found out he had been expelled from school. Now, Roy's father had lost his job, and Roy had lost his education. They were left with nothing. After Roy's father lost his job, he used all the money he had saved to open a small restaurant. Sua, Roy's close friend, often came by to eat with him. Things seemed to be looking up, but then something big and unexpected happened. Dunwan, who had always resented Roy, also had feelings for Sua. He tried to flirt with her, but she wasn't interested in him. Her heart belonged to Roy. This only made Dunwan angrier at Roy and his family. One night, Roy's father was out on his motorbike, delivering food for the restaurant. Out of nowhere, Dunwan, driving recklessly, crashed into him from behind, causing Roy's father to fall off the road and down a steep hill. He died instantly. It was a devastating loss for Roy, the only family he had left, and the father he looked up to with such admiration was gone. As Roy grieved over his father's death, the police arrived with shocking news. The people responsible for the accident wanted to settle things quietly. Roy was furious, feeling that they didn't respect his father's life at all. It was like they were trying to brush it under the rug. While Sua was helping pick up some documents, she noticed something strange, a photograph of Dunwan's car. She remembered the license plate number clearly. Everything clicked. The police and Dunwan's powerful family had arranged for someone else to take the blame for the accident. They were covering up the truth. Fueled by anger, Roy immediately went to confront Dunwan. That night, in the pouring rain, Roy found him in the hospital garden. When Dunwan saw Roy, he was startled and terrified, backing away and falling to the ground. All of Roy's pain and hatred boiled over. His father had meant the world to him, and now this bastard had taken everything away. Roy was blinded by rage and grief. He beat Dunwan until the boy collapsed, unconscious. In his fury, Roy picked up a rock, fully intending to kill Dunwan. Just as he was about to strike, Sua arrived with the police, who quickly intervened. The officers drew their guns, aiming them at Roy, and demanded that he drop the rock or they would shoot. Even as the situation escalated, Roy refused to lower the rock. One of the policemen cocked his gun, ready to pull the trigger. At the last second, Sua stepped between Roy and the officers, pleading with him. "Roy, think of your father," she said gently. "He wouldn't want to see you like this." Her words broke through Roy's anger. Thinking of his father, Roy slowly began to calm down. He dropped the stone, his anger fading into helplessness. The police lowered their guns, but Roy was left in despair, knowing he couldn't get his revenge. Shortly after, the police arrested him, and he was sent to prison. In prison, Roy received an unexpected visit from Dunwan's father, the president. The man offered Roy a deal. If Roy kneeled and apologized, he would be forgiven. But Roy, filled with fury, refused. "It's your son who should be kneeling," he spat, his voice shaking with anger. The president's face hardened, and he threatened Roy. "You'll regret this," he said coldly. "Let's see how miserable I can make your life." The president knew how close Sua was to Roy, so he immediately called her to his house. He knew she didn't have the money to continue her education, and he tried to bribe her into testifying in favor of his son, Dunwan. Sua asked, "How much money are you offering?" The president, finding her question amusing, laughed heartily. Later, Dunwan appeared, filled with regret. He wanted to turn himself in for his crimes, but his father wouldn't allow it. "You're the heir," the president said firmly, "and the heir cannot have a criminal record." Reluctantly, Dunwan obeyed his father. Determined to make his son crueler, the president took Dunwan to a farm. He grabbed a chicken and forced Dunwan to kill it, pushing him to be more and more heartless. Dunwan, bound by his father's expectations and the weight of his inheritance, followed his orders. His father watched with a cruel smile, laughing as Dunwan carried out the grisly task. The next day, Roy's trial began. The court sentenced him to 3 years in prison for manslaughter, although the truth was far more twisted. The president had arranged for someone else to take the blame, but once the confession was made, the person was killed, and the blame was shifted onto Roy. A police officer knew the truth and was disgusted, but he was powerless. The police director had been bribed and silenced. Roy's first day in prison was brutal. The older inmates forced him to kneel, but Roy only laughed in their faces, confusing them. Little did he know, the president had orchestrated this as well, arranging for the prisoners to beat him. Later, Sua came to visit Roy and saw the bruises on his face. Overcome with guilt, she tearfully confessed, "It was me. I betrayed you. I took the money so I could go to school." But Roy didn't blame her. "I don't hold it against you," he said softly. Before she left, he finally admitted, "I really like you, Sua, and when I get out of here, I'll find you." Sua hoped for the best, wishing that Roy would become successful and eventually take his revenge on the tycoon. They said their goodbyes, parting with a promise. From that moment on, Roy's mind was set. He would never forget his feud with the powerful family that destroyed his life. 3 years passed quickly, and the day had finally come. Roy was being released from prison. During his time behind bars, he had formed a close friendship with a well-known gangster, someone who left a strong impression on him. The first thing Roy did upon his release was visit the pub where he had last seen his father. Standing there, he silently made a promise. He would take revenge. With a new determination, Roy began gathering information about the Jenga Tycoon Group, the powerful family responsible for his father's death. He learned all about Dunwan and his family. Roy also followed the address from letters that Sua had sent him over the years, which led him to a lively street called Itaewon. It was festival day, and the streets were bustling with activity. Just as Roy was taking in the surroundings, Sua suddenly ran up and hugged him tightly. Roy was surprised and overjoyed to see her again after so long. They went out for drinks, catching up on the lost time. During their conversation, Sua revealed that she was working at Dunwan's family company, but Roy didn't hold it against her. He told her about his own plans. He would be working on an ocean ship for the next 7 years. The thought of being apart made Sua a little sad, but she understood. they parted ways, knowing they would be separated for a long time. 7 years flew by, and during that time, Sua had become very successful at Jenga Group. She earned the respect of the chairman, though Dunwan had been pursuing her romantically for years without success. Sua's heart still belonged to Roy. After finishing work one day, she hurried to Itaewon Street, where she and Roy had promised to meet. Sure enough, there he was, waiting for her. Sua's eyes sparkled with joy when she saw Roy. She hadn't expected his dream of opening a restaurant to come true, but there it was. Roy's restaurant, Dan Bam, was now open for business. It was the grand opening, and the air was filled with excitement. However, as the day went on, there were no customers. The rent on Itaewon Street was extremely high, and Roy had no idea how he was going to survive with an empty restaurant. Meanwhile, outside the nearby Itaewon High School, a group of girls was bullying another student, but they weren't expecting to face Yiseo, a tough girl with a fearless attitude. Instead of backing down, Yiseo pulled out her phone and started live-streaming the situation. The video went viral, making Yiseo an instant celebrity. However, the live stream led to some trouble. The parents of the other girls came looking for Yiseo, furious over the video. But Yiseo, as stubborn as ever, wasn't afraid. When one of the mothers tried to hit her, Yiseo slapped her back, shocking everyone. Roy happened to be nearby and stopped the situation from escalating further, demanding that Yiseo apologize for slapping the woman. Yiseo, showing her bold personality, lied, saying, "My father died because of her." She then mocked Roy by teasing him. Yiseo's rebellious nature reminded Roy of himself. She was a troublemaker, often getting on the principal's nerves at school, but he couldn't control her. At the same time, at Jenga Group, Dunwan was presenting a plan to open a bar on Itaewon Street. Sua, however, strongly objected to the idea, arguing that the plan wasn't sound. The president, seeing the flaws in the proposal, tore it up and slapped Dunwan across the face, frustrated by the fact that their Itaewon store had been losing money for 3 months. Afterward, he handed over control of all the Itaewon locations to Sua. Dunwan, angry and humiliated, confronted Sua with threats, but she was not intimidated. She fired back, saying, "Are you sure you'll inherit the company? The chairman has a son outside the family." She was referring to Yiseo's friend, someone connected to the family. Later that day, Dunwan and Yiseo were riding a motorbike together through Itaewon. Suddenly, Dunwan had to swerve to avoid hitting someone, causing Yiseo to fly off the bike. As fate would have it, Roy was nearby, handing out flyers for his restaurant. He quickly rushed over to help her, only to realize that Yiseo was the same disobedient girl he had scolded earlier. Roy's friend ran over to check on him, but Yiseo, quick to act, hit the friend on the head. Roy, who was about to say something to Yiseo, suddenly fainted from exhaustion. Realizing what had happened, Yiseo and her friend rushed him to the hospital. Roy had collapsed from overworking himself. At the same time, the president learned that Roy had opened a restaurant in Itaewon. He ordered Sua to do something to sabotage Roy's business. This left Sua feeling conflicted. She still had feelings for Roy, but her need for money clouded her judgment, and she decided to follow the president's orders. Meanwhile, Roy woke up in the hospital. Yiseo was there, criticizing his old-fashioned advertising method of handing out leaflets. "This is outdated," she said bluntly. She kindly showed him how to use social media to attract customers and grow his business faster. Roy took her advice and thanked her before they parted ways. That night, Yiseo and her friend went to the bustling Jenga restaurant to check it out. The place was packed with customers. However, Yiseo noticed that 2 of the patrons were underage and had them kicked out. So, the group decided to head over to Dan Bam, Roy's restaurant, instead. When they arrived, Roy greeted them. Since there were no customers, and despite knowing they were underage, he allowed them in. Yiseo quickly noticed why the restaurant was struggling. It looked too shabby, with no appeal to attract customers. Later, Roy went out for a walk to observe how other restaurants were bringing in customers. By chance, he ran into Sua, and they started talking. Roy confided that for 2 months, he had been trying to understand why his restaurant wasn't succeeding. Sua joined him at Dan Bam, and immediately noticed that Yiseo's group was underage. She quickly called the police. Inside the restaurant, Yiseo's friends started behaving rudely towards the staff. Roy stepped in, scolding the young man and reminding him to be respectful. Drunk and angry, the guy insulted Roy and grabbed him by the collar, ready to throw a punch. But before he could hit Roy, one of Roy's employees intervened, striking the young man and knocking him out. The employee then grabbed a boiling pot of food and poured it on the boy's feet, revealing his violent nature. Just as things escalated, the police arrived, responding to the report Sua had made about the underage patrons. Everyone involved was arrested and taken to the station. The usual penalty for such an offense was a 2-month closure of the restaurant, which left Roy frustrated. To make things worse, Dunwan showed up, following his father's orders, to mock Roy. He laughed maniacally, enjoying Roy's failure. The police, realizing Dunwan was the president's son, tried to sweep the situation under the rug, but Roy wouldn't let it go. "Treat me like you would any guilty person," he said sternly. "Why are you letting him off just because his family is rich?" Roy couldn't understand why the police were so afraid of the tycoon's son. After speaking, Roy walked away in anger. Yiseo chased after him, frustrated. "Have you lost your mind? If you close for 2 months, you'll go bankrupt," she shouted. She criticized Roy for being too straightforward and not knowing when to bow his head, but Roy shot back, calling her someone who only knew how to destroy things. As they argued, Dunwan approached, deliberately bringing up the fact that he had a hand in Roy's father's death. He tried to provoke Roy into attacking him, but Roy had learned from his past mistakes. He kept his patience, even as Dunwan remained arrogant. Calmly, Roy announced, "I'm going to dig up the case of you stabbing my father to death. I will make you pay for your sins." For the first time, Dunwan looked truly afraid. Yiseo, standing by, found herself more interested in Roy and his determination. She decided she would help him get the revenge he deserved. Because of the fight, Yiseo and Dunwan were punished by their school. They had to run laps and write 100 reports of criticism. Yiseo, ever defiant, didn't write a single word, but instead drew a picture of Roy. She had become deeply impressed with his character and style. Yiseo became even more curious about Roy's past, going online to search for information about the case involving his father's death. Every day she passed by Roy's restaurant, even though it was closed for the time being. A week later, it was New Year's Eve, and everyone gathered together to celebrate the arrival of the new year. Yiseo, now 18, went into a bar with her friends, proudly showing off her ID card. However, despite being surrounded by people and drinking, she felt restless. Her mind kept drifting to Roy, the person who had helped her. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Meanwhile, Roy bumped into Sua at a familiar spot. He still didn't know that it was Sua who had reported him to the police, leading to his restaurant's 2-month closure. In fact, as they talked, he almost confessed his feelings for her, unaware of her betrayal. Later that night, Yiseo decided to head home. As she left the bar, one of the men she had been drinking with earlier began following her. His intentions were clear. He tried to force himself on her. Yiseo firmly refused, but he wouldn't stop. In a desperate move, she threw a lump of money at him, hoping it would make him leave. But the man felt insulted and lashed out, hitting Yiseo. As the situation escalated, she had no choice but to run, darting into a small alley with the man in pursuit. Panicked, Yiseo rushed into a men's restroom, and to her surprise, she ran straight into Roy. Roy, startled and shy, didn't know what to say, but Yiseo managed a smile. Just then, the man chasing her barged in, acting calm and pretending to be her boyfriend. But Roy noticed Yiseo's injuries and knew something was wrong. Sensing her fear, Yiseo asked Roy for help, and without hesitation, Roy fought off the attacker. The two of them quickly ran away. As luck would have it, they bumped into Sua, who had just arrived. All three of them ran together, and for the first time, Yiseo found running away to be fun. But Sua, noticing how Roy was concerned about Yiseo, felt a pang of jealousy. After parting ways, Yiseo stopped Roy and invited him out for a drink to thank him for helping her. During their conversation, Yiseo offered to promote his restaurant on her Instagram, hoping to bring more business to Dan Bam. While Roy went to get water, Sua and Yiseo stayed behind, and their conversation quickly turned tense. Sua, confident and a little arrogant, boasted, "Roy has liked me for the past 10 years. Yiseo, unfazed, responded, "Well, I like Roy now." The tension grew, and the two began criticizing each other. The atmosphere was thick with rivalry, and it became clear that both women had strong feelings for Roy. At one point, Sua blamed Yiseo for the restaurant's closure, but Yiseo, being sharp, turned the tables on her. "Did you report the restaurant to the police?" she asked directly, catching Sua off guard. Sua's sudden guilt was obvious, and Yiseo despised her even more for betraying Roy. Sua admitted to what she had done, but tried to justify it, saying that no matter what, Roy would still like her. When Roy returned, Sua confessed everything. She admitted that she was the one who had called the police because she thought Roy liked her and would forgive her. But Roy, clearly disappointed, simply said, "I expected more from you." Sua, feeling ashamed, quickly excused herself and left. Roy and Yiseo stayed behind, continuing to drink together. Yiseo, taking her chance, pointed out all the things the restaurant needed to improve: its decoration, staff, and menu. As they talked, Roy started to confide in her. His openness and vulnerability made Yiseo like him even more. After a while, Roy stood up, but he was so drunk that he stumbled and fell. As she helped him up, Yiseo realized just how much she had grown to care for him. In a moment of impulse, she kissed him passionately. The next morning, Roy woke up in the hospital, having no memory of the kiss. Meanwhile, Yiseo confided in her mother about her feelings for Roy. She explained that he was in a tough situation, seeking revenge, but for some reason, she was drawn to him and couldn't pull away. Her mother, concerned, warned her against getting too involved, fearing that Yiseo would only end up hurt. Conflicted, Yiseo decided to flip a coin to determine whether she should continue pursuing Roy. Heads meant she would stop. When the coin came up heads, she hesitated but decided to ignore it, choosing instead to follow her heart. Overjoyed, Yiseo immediately ran to Roy's pub. The moment she saw him, her feelings deepened. She had truly fallen in love with him. Yiseo made a bold decision. She wanted to become the manager of Roy's restaurant and help him achieve his dream. Unexpectedly, another new addition joined the team: Jang Geun-soo, the illegitimate son of the tycoon. Geun-soo was the child of a concubine and had endured years of mistreatment from his stepmother, as well as neglect from his father. After his mother left, his father, the president, kicked him out of the house. Geun-soo had lived like an orphan, doing whatever he could to survive. Drawn to Roy's kindness, he asked for a job at Danbam. With Geun-soo on board, the restaurant now had 5 staff members. Seung-gwon, another worker, initially argued that the restaurant was too small to need a manager. However, Yiseo quickly pointed out several flaws that were contributing to its failure. She noted that the staff were holding food in their hands in a way that made it seem unsanitary. The menu lacked standout dishes, making it hard for customers to choose. And there wasn't a proper background for customers to take check-in photos. Additionally, she criticized the presentation of the food, saying that the dishes were unattractive and didn't taste appealing. After hearing her analysis, Roy was impressed by Yiseo's insight. He immediately appointed her as the restaurant manager and instructed the rest of the staff to follow her lead. Meanwhile, the president of Jenga Group made a startling discovery. A female director had quietly been buying up shares in the company. At this rate, she could become a major shareholder and threaten his control over the corporation. Concerned, the president arranged a meeting with the director to question her intentions. Back at Danbam, Yiseo wasted no time in transforming the restaurant. She had part of the wall demolished to create more space and used her design skills to redecorate the interior, making it visually appealing for customers to take photos. When the restaurant reopened, Yiseo used her popular Instagram account to promote it, and the strategy worked. Soon, Danbam was packed with customers, with many waiting in line outside. The once empty restaurant was now thriving. Even though the staff were overwhelmed with work, everyone was happy with the restaurant's success. Roy was proud of Yiseo, and on that day alone, they made over 3 million won in revenue. However, not everyone was pleased. Sua, seeing the restaurant's success, was furious. The next day, the president and Sua walked along Itaewon Street to survey the competition. The president revealed his wish for Sua to marry his son, Jang Geun-won, but Sua, who despised Geun-won, didn't respond. The president took this opportunity to lead Sua to the door of Danbam. Seeing how busy the restaurant was, he ordered Sua to find a way to sabotage it. A few days later, the restaurant remained packed with customers. However, with the chef on leave, Roy had to step in and handle the cooking. Everything seemed to be running smoothly until customers began complaining. One table found hair in their food, while another said their dish was too bland. The chef's lack of attention to detail made Yiseo furious. She scolded the chef, demanding that they remain focused, and suggested that Roy fire the chef to prevent further damage to the restaurant's reputation. Roy, however, didn't agree. Instead of firing the chef, he called her in to discuss the problems, but showed kindness by unexpectedly doubling her salary. Roy believed in giving her a chance to improve and encouraged her to work harder to live up to the pay increase. He then gave a motivational speech to boost the team's morale, reminding everyone to unite and strive towards success together. Although most of the staff felt encouraged, Yiseo couldn't hide her disappointment. She was upset that Roy hadn't followed her advice to fire the chef. One morning, Yiseo accidentally ran into a group of her old classmates who were bullies. They approached her with the intention of humiliating her by trying to strip her, but luckily, Gunsu appeared just in time to stop them. In the argument that followed, one of the classmates admitted that it was she who had reported them to the police, not Sua, as Yiseo had thought. Realizing her mistake, Yiseo slapped the classmate in frustration. Another friend stepped forward and also got slapped in the chaos. The rest of the group, seeing Yiseo's fierce reaction, quickly backed away. Yiseo's stubbornness reminded everyone of Roy's determination. In the following days, Yiseo took a more active role at Danbam, frequently checking on the chef, Hyene's dishes. Her attention and guidance helped improve Hyene's cooking skills, resolving some of the internal conflicts within the restaurant. With things running more smoothly, Roy's restaurant started to thrive again. Meanwhile, Sua sat in a pub, thinking about the president's words. He had asked her which side she wanted to join. This weighed heavily on her, and she drank until she was completely drunk. On her way home, she ran into Roy and his group. Realizing she was in no state to continue, everyone left except for Yiseo, who stayed behind. In her drunken state, Sua confessed all her feelings to Roy, her sparkling eyes momentarily softening his heart. The atmosphere between them grew romantic, and just as they were about to kiss, Yiseo, standing nearby, quickly intervened. She placed her hand over Sua's mouth, pushing her away and preventing the kiss. "I want Roy's lips to stay untouched," Yiseo said, making Sua feel embarrassed as she sobered up. Despite the awkwardness, Sua, wanting to tease Yiseo, insisted on joining Roy's group for a meal. Roy, unable to refuse, agreed, making the atmosphere uncomfortable, especially for Yiseo. During dinner, Sua commented that Janga Group's success came from their strategy of operating as a restaurant chain and the president's secret recipe. Hearing this, Roy immediately shared his vision. "I'm going to turn Danbam into a bigger franchise than Janga Group," he said with determination. His words filled everyone with excitement, and they all raised their glasses to toast this new dream. Later, Sua and Yiseo had another tense conversation in the restroom. Yiseo bluntly revealed that she had oppositional defiant disorder and admitted she liked Roy. She warned Sua, saying, "If anyone gets in my way, I'll do whatever it takes to destroy them." Not backing down, Sua confidently declared, "If that's the case, we'll fight to the end." Meanwhile, at the Janga Group office, Sua reported to the president about Danbom's recent success. She explained that the restaurant was thriving thanks to Yiseo's management and mentioned Yiseo's incredibly high IQ of 162. She also shared that Roy intended to turn Danbam into a franchise chain. Hearing this, the president became concerned, realizing that Danbam could one day become a major competitor to Janga Group. As Danbam continued to grow in popularity, Yiseo began making plans to expand the restaurant. She proposed recruiting more staff and suggested receiving a 20% commission instead of a salary. However, things became complicated when Yiseo's mother found out that she had dropped out of college to work at a bar. Her mother was furious, but Yiseo stood firm, telling her, "I like Roy, and I'm determined to succeed, even if I fail." The argument between mother and daughter escalated, and they couldn't find any common ground. Heartbroken, Yiseo packed her things and left home. While she was sitting sadly on a bridge, Roy passed by. He knew that her mother had kicked her out for dropping out of school to work at his restaurant. Roy felt deeply grateful to Yiseo for everything she had done. At the same time, he felt sorry for her situation, knowing she had been kicked out of her home. In his own simple way, he tried to comfort her. And though his words were naive, they made Yiseo feel much better. Standing together on the bridge, they made a promise to help Danbom grow and surpass Janga Group, turning it into a successful franchise. They talked about their dreams for the future until dawn. As the restaurant continued to grow, it became clear that they needed more staff. However, the candidates who came for interviews were all unsuitable for the job. Just when things seemed hopeless, a very pretty girl arrived to apply. Seeing her, the employees and Roy were delighted, but Yiseo immediately refused to hire her, much to their disappointment. At the end of the interviews, a young man named Tony showed up. He was Polish-Korean and seemed eager to work. Yiseo thought he was a good fit and hired him on the spot. With the team now stronger, Roy wanted to push further. He contacted a television station to request an interview for the restaurant, and to his surprise, they agreed. Roy was overjoyed by the news and, in his excitement, accidentally shared it with Sua. The two went for a walk and talked about many things. Gyun-won, seeing them together, became jealous and reported everything to his father, the president of Janga Group. The president knew that Roy was not someone to be underestimated. He was a man with more determination than most. Fearing that Danbam could become a real threat, the president started plotting to destroy Roy's restaurant. The next day, Roy went to the TV station to finalize the recording plans. There, he ran into Gyun-won, who used his influence to get Danbam excluded from the show. Roy realized that Sua had unintentionally revealed his plans, giving Gyun-won the opportunity to sabotage him. Gyun-won smugly told Roy that he would make sure Danbam failed, but Roy, undeterred, replied confidently, "I will bring your company to its knees." Disheartened by the cancellation of the recording, Roy was deeply saddened. Yiseo stayed by his side, offering encouragement. As they walked down the street together, they unexpectedly ran into Sua. This time, Roy coldly walked past her, leaving Sua hurt and confused. Sensing Roy's turmoil, Yiseo kindly told him the truth. Sua wasn't the one who had called the police that day. Realizing his mistake, Roy immediately ran to find Sua to apologize. After searching for a while, he finally spotted her at a bus stop. Grabbing her hand, he apologized earnestly and reassured her that he would soon take down Janga Group, so she wouldn't have to suffer anymore. As the bus arrived, the two parted ways. After Sua left, Roy made a phone call to a mysterious contact, monitoring Janga Group's stock prices. The contact reported that Roy's shares were now worth more than 10 billion won. Without hesitation, Roy ordered the purchase of more Janga shares. The news quickly reached the president. Roy had quietly become the third largest shareholder of Janga Group. 8 years ago, Roy had bought shares when Gyun-won's scandal caused the prices to plummet, using his father's insurance money. Shocked and furious, the president couldn't believe Roy had pulled off such a strategic move. He laughed bitterly, realizing that Roy, whom he once considered insignificant, had become a major threat. The president decided to confront Roy personally and went to Danbam. He thought Roy was just a small fry, but now saw that Roy had outsmarted him. 8 years ago, Roy had been quietly planning his revenge, using the money from his father's death to buy stock in the very company that had ruined his family. Despite the tension, Roy welcomed the president with hospitality. He instructed the chef to prepare the best dishes and personally served the meal to the president's table. As they ate, the president suddenly asked, "Why did you buy so many of my shares? What is your real purpose?" Everyone in the room was shocked, realizing just how much wealth Roy had accumulated. Roy, however, didn't reveal his true intention to take over Janga Group. He lied, saying he bought the shares simply because he saw potential in the company. The president and his team enjoyed the food, but as the meal ended, the president mentioned Roy's father. He advised Roy to give up his fight against Janga Group, warning him, "If you continue, you will fail miserably." Hearing this, Roy couldn't hide his emotions. He spoke openly about his plan for revenge, making it clear that he was determined to make the president pay for his father's death. Roy vowed to make Chairman Jang and his son, Gyun-won, pay for killing his father. Filled with anger, he shouted, and the atmosphere became extremely tense. Chairman Jang, furious, wanted to respond, but Roy remained composed. Yiseo, witnessing the scene, realized how bold and determined Roy truly was. Roy then revealed that this was only the first step in his plan to take over Janga Group. His secret weapon was his friend, Ho-jin, who had helped him while he was in prison. It turned out that Ho-jin had been one of Gyun-won's victims, and Roy had protected him from the bully. Out of gratitude, Ho-jin secretly managed Roy's finances and business, using his skills in finance to turn Roy's 100 million won into a fortune over 10 years. A few days earlier, Roy had met with the CEO of Jenga Group to propose a partnership. He wanted to help her overthrow the president, Chairman Jang. The CEO agreed to the plan, as Roy's father had once been kind to her, and she wanted to repay that kindness. However, the condition was that her shares in the company needed to exceed those of Chairman Zhang's for the plan to work. A few days later, the two sides met again and shook hands, agreeing to cooperate. The next day, the CEO visited Chairman Zhang's house to play chess. She advised him to reconsider giving the company to his son, Geun-won, and suggested he choose someone more capable to lead the group. After the CEO left, Chairman Zhang's secretary Kim brought him some photos showing evidence of Roy and the CEO working together. Realizing Roy was a serious threat, Chairman Zhang began plotting how to counter his moves. Meanwhile, Yiseo was becoming more impressed with Roy's strategic mind. Although she was highly intelligent, she hadn't expected Roy to be so clever in his plans. Geun-soo, curious about Roy's history, asked Yiseo what his feud with Jenga Group was about, but Yiseo didn't know the full story. Geun-soo later went home to ask his father about it, but instead of answering, the president cursed him for being incompetent and for working alongside Roy, the enemy. Humiliated, Geun-soo left the house and called Yiseo to confide in her. He admitted that he really liked her, but Yiseo gave him a surprising condition. She said, "If you want a chance with me, steal the company from your father." Geun-soo was stunned by her boldness. When the two returned, they saw Roy preparing to leave. Yiseo immediately dropped everything to follow him, stubbornly insisting on staying by his side. Roy, finding her persistence endearing, agreed to let her come along. Together, they took a bus to a small countryside town. On the bus, Roy shared stories of his past, recounting the harsh and painful experiences he had endured. After arriving, they visited the home of the former police officer, who had investigated the accident involving Roy's father 10 years ago. The officer knew that Roy had been wrongly accused by the police chief, but had been powerless to help at the time. Filled with regret, the officer had resigned from his job and retreated to live quietly with his wife. Now, kneeling before Roy, he apologized and said he was willing to pay any price, even his life, to make up for the injustice.